Another serious issue is a supply shortage issue, which we've kind of alluded to previously. And this can be from a sudden increase in demand, or it could be a constraint that's been generated by a logistics network like we just discussed, or a manufacturing shutdown, which is like what's happened to a lot of the companies where they've single sourced their products out of China, and China was shut down. So, as Dan mentioned earlier, we're all familiar with the push over the last 20 plus years to move lots of the manufacturing over to lower cost areas. And this has had an impact as the shutdown kind of started in Asia. This has had a huge impact on a lot of customers and businesses. So the timing of this outbreak is devastating for a lot of companies that depend on this winter production to meet their seasonal summertime demand, especially in the West here, where a pre-build is required, and then that was not able to be done. So having supply shortages obviously can affect your purchase finished goods, but it can also affect a single raw material product could wind up affecting an entire network of finished goods that are dependent on that raw material. There's a lot of industries that are having these supply constraints, from everything from food products to medical products, consumer electronics, automotive, and even the mining industry is having a significant decrease in output. Next slide, please. So the supply shortage is probably the most common issue in this particular, in this disruption, just because of a lot of the factors that we've already discussed. Raw material and purchase finished goods can make most of these cancellations or delays. So there are several different mitigation strategies that you can put in, and there's some short-term, medium-term, and long-term assessments that need to be made. Vendor diversification, as this first bullet here is probably the one of the most critical, but it's not really probable to do that for in the short term unless you have pre-approved suppliers in many cases. Most of these companies have highly engineered products, and you would have to have multiple suppliers approved ahead of time. So if in the medium term you can get those approved suppliers in place, in the medium term, that's a great mitigation strategy. But in the short term, about the only thing you can do with that is to activate any pre-approved suppliers that you might have, and then quickly take a look at their supply chain and how they're going to be able to support you in this initiative. Longer term, the vendor collaboration for business continuity is important to be able to work together as a holistic chain. Is really important, so that you know immediately what the capabilities are of your entire network, all the way through from the suppliers to the customer. So another example here of a mitigation strategy is to evaluate your product. So you can have product substitutions that you can put in the short term for raw materials. In many cases, you can substitute, in some cases, a higher cost material that can be substituted temporarily to get you out of a bind, but there's going to be a margin impact to that. And so one of the things to do, we'll talk about in a minute, is to simulate these substitutions to see what the margin impact is going to be, and be able to make a decision about that and how that's going to affect your margins. If you have to supply this to a customer and you're losing money on it, it might be okay to do for a period of time, but it won't be sustainable in the long run. Then in the medium term and the long term, adjust this, attempt to balance this just in time um, solution that reduces cost with a just in case process that Dan has discussed, where you'll try to minimize your working capital but be able to be more resilient at the same time. So reevaluating the supplier and the product portfolio and focusing on these, evaluating these materials that are going to be critical to your business process is the most important thing that you can do. Being able to have visibility for the network and the potential issues that you're going to experience is critical to being able to make predictive decisions. And so having great dashboard capability and alert capability to specifically hone in on things that are important and get rid of the noise is the best mitigation strategy. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look specifically at activating this, at activating the secondary approved vendors that were already in place, and some of the tasks that might be necessary to be able to activate that action plan. So in the supplier diversification, we're going to need to execute some scenario planning to evaluate the vendor capacity of these alternate suppliers, and then collaborate with those vendors to make sure that they're going to be able to support you because they may have other crisis things that they're working on as well. So being able to take a few simulations to them and collaborate with them is really the most important thing that you can do. And once you have evaluated that, then you're going to go and actually put that into place and be able to make sure that it works with your simulation by changing some master data, updating some transactional data, and possibly some configuration of giving some new adjustments. And then be able to look at the long-term, medium-term, and short-term, short-term, medium-term, and long-term impacts to putting that process in place. And there's even process engineering things that you can do in the long term that you might decide to realign your buyer roles from a region-centric to a product-centric scenario in order to be able to long-term handle these type of disruptions.